Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Welcome to Smart Sustainability. Who isn't ready for a little boost in their life? New look, new feel, perhaps a new you? 2 years of lockdown, staying in, isolating, and of course coming out of the winter, where we're longing for it, many of us are getting antsy. And not just in a defiant speaking up mode, but also antsy in getting our lives back and getting back out. Feeling strong and comfortable with who you are and ready for warmer temperatures, mixing and mingling. Fashion plays a big role in feeling great, looking great, feeling sexy, and expressing who you are. Yet fashion also hugely impacts people, the environment, and our consciousness. The interplay of fashion, environment, your well-being, and planet is what we want to talk about today. Good evening. Thanks for being with us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. Sustainable fashion has been an interesting field, confusing and largely undefined at this point, offering a lot of room for growth, expansion, and new opportunities. Once we overcome the perception and find a better definition of what it actually is. See, by now, sustainable fashion sounds nice, but most think of it as charity, green, or putting fashion in the eco corner. No one at this point, I think, would describe sustainable fashion as cool, sexy, and fun quite yet. Yet the latter really is the underlying attraction to fashion. The fashion industry is one of the big impactors on the environment, from the materials that are being used to how they're sourced, made, produced, to how they're shipped, traded, and at the end of the cycle, wasted. The fashion industry is worth about $1.5 trillion globally and employs more than 300 million people along the value chain. It produces an estimated 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. The production of crops, fibers, and garments pollute water, air, and soil. The textile industry is actually the second largest polluter of local freshwater in the world, mounting up to about 1/5 of all water pollution. Manufacturing clothing takes up a lot of water as well. To produce one cotton shirt, just as an example, the fashion industry uses 2,700 liters of water. That's equivalent of 2.5 years of drinking water. Add on the synthetic fibers and the mountains of overproduced clothes every day. 87% of total fiber input in the United States is either landfilled or incinerated. Less than 1% of the material used to produce clothing is recycled into new clothing. Textiles account for 22% of total mixed waste globally. And add to that the devastating effects it has on people in sweatshops and where most of the clothing is manufactured. And of course, clearly, fashion impacts natural resources, people, and planet, while of course it also impacts our overall well-being. Looking great makes an impact on how you feel, how you come across, how you express yourself. So what can be done to move the fashion industry more towards a circular economy and make sustainable fashion more conscious consumer choice? We're discussing with Rachel Kahn, founder of the Ecosystem Incubator, a system that brings sustainable fashion contributors together to have a more concentrated effort on sustainable fashion and a circular economy. We give you a quick overview and play a video what that actually means.
Have you ever noticed how fashion is often thought of as a competitive cutthroat industry? With decades of experience, we realised something new is possible, and in fact necessary, the ecosystem incubator. We're creating the space and the community to birth a new approach for fashion. One based on trust, collaboration and transparency that supports all stakeholders in the system. By building on the best of living systems thinking in combination with new technologies, a true ecosystem can be created that can help us all thrive. Explore the ecosystemincubator.com and we will look forward to connecting with you.
With us also is Maria Costa, co-founder of Belobags, a British-Brazilian accessories brand that uses recycled plastic and waste materials to create bold, timeless designs that simultaneously give back to community. What that looks like, we'll show you in a little bit. We have Alicia Hardesty, designer and former Project Runway contestant of season 10, who sees herself as a change catalyst, who likes to bring circularity into fashion, and has her own brand also, which is the original Tomboy. Also with us tonight is Zain Hassan, CEO and founder of Sterling Method, a lifestyle brand for slow living and conscious consumerism. He directly partners with local communities and artisans in Pakistan, sourcing premium organic cotton wool throws and blankets, but he is based out of New York City. Welcome all of you on Smart Sustainability. Me?
Hello.
Great to have you on. And just actually for our viewers to know, we're having a lot of different time zones here. We have Brazil, we have London, we have Wisconsin and New York, and of course DC. So there we are. I do want to start with the first question, because sustainable fashion, that's a very passion-oriented field, I think. How did you get in? Let's start with Zain on this one. How did you get in there? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, Sterling Method was born out of the COVID-19 pandemic a couple of years ago, and I was at a point, a crossroads in my life personally, and there's a compass that I personally live by, and I figured that the best way to push that needle and to go the next step would be to create my own brand and have my philosophy on life be manifested through this brand. And that's trying to live slowly, especially as a result of what we saw through COVID-19 and there's so much division in the world going at such a breakneck speed. The Sterling Method is living slowly and living, as you mentioned earlier, consciously, to put thought into what we purchase and how we consume things. And that turned into this passion project of mine and ended up with Sterling Method as the manifestation, which is, as you mentioned earlier, partnering with local communities and artisans in Pakistan who live very simply, very consciously in a sustainable environment and create home goods of very premium quality. And right now it's blankets and throws that Sterling Method is doing.
I got a question for you, Zain. So when you talk about living slowly, for example, I do believe your upbringing was in Pakistan, so I think you have a very different idea also of a slow living. When you contrast this to the United States, where we're all used to this super fast living, particularly in the last 10 years, where really almost what used to happen in a week feels now it happens in a day and things like that. How are you kind of bridging this contrast and bring that into your collection?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a lot of it has to do with the power of perspective. Growing up in Pakistan gives a certain perspective on life. Being here in New York and the East Coast now for over 15 years is a different perspective. So Sterling Method is, the method in itself is to live slowly but not compromise our lifestyle with bad quality or things that are of a nature that have too many byproducts or negative externalities. So when I was growing up in Pakistan, it was a lot of the goods that I consumed and my upbringing was very pure. Not to say that lifestyle here was impure, but it was just at such a fast-tracked lifestyle that I didn't allow me to flourish and thrive as much as I think we can collectively by bringing that different perspective. So Sterling Method brings that perspective of slow living and conscious consumerism in a system that has traditionally been very fast, very aggressive. And so it tempers it out, and I think that's the qualifying factor in what's making it a uniter between two different cultures.
Okay. Maria, Belobag, tell us a little bit about why you're doing what you're doing and how did you get into this?
Yeah, so I started in finance. So I used to work for a mergers and acquisition company. And but when I was little, I used to live in the Amazon, and I saw firsthand what humans can do to nature. And not only that is I understood that sometimes people don't really mean to be devastating, a rainforest. It's because they don't have opportunities, they don't have education, and this is the best thing that they can do to survive. So when I was growing up, I always knew that I wanted to do something to contribute for a better world. And the way that I found was through fashion, because I love fashion. I always did. I was always like a consumer of luxury goods, but I always felt like the brands weren't transparent enough. So I didn't know what it meant to have like a leather bag. What are the chemicals, in those products? Who is making this bag? And it's something that always bothered me. And with my business partner, we were talking one day, and we were like, we wanted a bag that was practical, convertible, and we couldn't find it. And we were like, let's start a company. And when we start to research all the materials involved, we realized how everything impacts nature so badly. And we never thought about that ever in our lives, And we're like, okay, so if we're going to start a brand, we need to start researching and seeing what we can do. And for us, that came with the idea that we had to give opportunities to people in need. And in my community, there are so many people that need that opportunity to thrive. That everyone is so talented here, but they couldn't compete with other countries, because of the price. And so we thought it would be a good idea to work with these people. And in our journey of learning about materials, we came across which something that we're very passionate about now, is that we should reuse what we already have in the world. We need to mitigate waste. We need to give what exists a new life, because there are so many materials that are designed to last a lifetime, but they turn into products that are disposable and have a shorter lifespan. And then what happens in landfill, like you were saying about textiles and all of that, something has to be done to stop or to help turn the industry more circular. But we need to lower the landfills.
But you use waste materials, right? How do we envision that? Are you using plastic bottles and turn them into bags?
No, we use plastic bottles as well, but we use seat belts, actually, because they are so, in Brazil, I don't know how it works in America, but in Brazil there is a law that after 10 years of use, the seat belts, they have to be, you have to put new seat belts in your car. And what they do with those seat belts, they throw it away. And they either go to landfill, or most commonly they get incinerated. And when we saw this, seat belts, they are so durable, they are so strong, and they're tough and so glossy, it's such a beautiful material, and no one ever, thinks about that. And when I started to research where we could get these materials from, I went to car mechanics in my local community, and we started trading seatbelts, not only for money, but for English lessons to their kids as well. So nowadays we collect the seatbelts, but we also help the people in my community, with learning English so they can have better opportunities in life. And we also use plastic bottles, but we use plastic. We have a recycling center. So we get the plastic bottles from there and we turn it into fabric. So we have a partnership with a company in Brazil that help us with this process as well. So our fabric is 100% made from plastic bottles.
Okay, so we do want to play the video. We have a video that shows a bag, and I really would like to show that here, and so you have an idea of what this actually looks like. I think actually there one does see a little bit that you used to like luxury fashion. If you really look at this, it does not have the feel of sort of like an eco-fashion type, if I may say that. So I think it really shows us that there's so many opportunities of how we can use that and really leverage it in a great way. I also want to show for a moment what Zain has been talking about. We do have another video, I don't know yet if it's quite ready, so we talk a little bit about that slow living kind of style that he was referring to. Can we play that? Show you sort of what it is a little bit. So we have an idea of what we're talking about. Now I want to move on to Alicia. Alicia, you sort of see all of this from the American side, right? So you've been a Project Runway contestant. You have your own brand. Talk to us a little bit. Why have you gotten into sustainable fashion?
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't even say that I've gotten into it as much as I've kind of become obsessed over the last couple of years, and that has been a COVID effect for me as well. I mean, my brand Original Tomboy, when I started it back in 2012, it kind of to me was by nature sustainable. I had everything made. I was living in LA at the time. Everything was made locally. All of my materials weren't necessarily sustainable, which is why this conversation is so great, because depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different definition of what sustainability means. Mm-hmm. But the business model wasn't necessarily sustainable because I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest with you. But I'm in the process of revisiting that brand and what it means and how I want to revive it. But in my industry experience so far, working for small companies, working for big companies, and seeing the level at which, at mass scale and a huge volume, and what we consider sustainable at that level versus, smaller, more localized brands, and seeing the difference between those two has really gotten me into wanting to change how we operate in this industry, which is how me and Rachel got connected in the first place. Just reconsidering what value is and reshaping the landscape. And I think consumers aren't going to understand what that means until we start to do it internally. It's kind of like how self-awareness works. You've got to go inward before things start to change outward. And so I think that's the case is true for the fashion industry. But my brand Original Tomboy, was based on kind of me growing up a tomboy in the country. I grew up in Kentucky. And, my take on it now is really, it ties into what Maria was saying, like tying everything back to nature and using nature as an example. And I think for the most part, we as people are just out here trying to live our lives and do the best that we can. And you shouldn't need a PhD to understand what sustainability is or how to participate. And so I think one of the biggest things for me is showing people how to connect back to nature on one hand, and on the other hand, re-understanding our relationship to clothing. Because, clothing has become so, it's like, fashion for the most part is junk food. It's the equivalent. Yeah. And we don't need everything that we think we need. And there's this hype culture out there. There's all this stuff that's going on. And there's so much noise. But if you really just go back to what's the most important, why do you love these certain garments? What do they do for you? And then those are the ones you're going to hang on to the longest, probably. And I think, as we move forward, it's more about reconnecting to value. And then also what helps us do that, for me personally, has been reconnecting with nature. And so I think the more that I can do that through my brand and through my, how I live my life, the better off I'm going to be in this industry. And hopefully I can be a leading, example of what that means to be sustainable, living slowly, like Zane said. And all of this ties together. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. And that, the short answer to the whole journey so far.
Yeah. I think the reconnecting with nature is what we're struggling most with at this point, particularly in the United States. And I think also the understanding quality aspect, that really has gotten lost in the last few decades because pricing took over. We have this global manufacturing, you move somewhere else. I actually, my family has a manufacturing, or used to have a manufacturing business, so I know a little bit about the manufacturing. It's like, but you could also see that really a lot of the quality wasn't valued anymore over decades. So you've seen a lot of industries, artisan industries, a lot of handmade things were really disappearing because people couldn't make a living off of it anymore because you had all these cheap productions coming from cheap areas, these throw-out things coupled with the throw-out culture. That understanding what quality is, you mentioned something like when you look at a garment, what that is to you. I think that's challenging for most of us right now, isn't it? Alicia?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think, even for me personally, like I enjoy going to thrift stores. I like old things. I like things with a story. And that's not the only way that I shop, but that is a big part of it. But I appreciate, the way garments used to be made. I appreciate the way they used to fit, for example, like all of that. And it to me goes into what makes a garment sustainable, because not only have things, because we need to make more and more and more, it's become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And to the customer, if you can buy something for $5 and this person over here is selling it for $10 and it's essentially the same thing, they're going to go for the cheaper option because that's the landscape that we've all kind of created. It's a race to the bottom.
Right.
And I think, we don't realize what's been sacrificed along the way. Fit, quality, fabric, how long that garment is going to last. And so those things go back into the system and they're not as valuable. But when you find things that are really good, or like even a t-shirt that's a really great fit or a good fabric, it can hold up. Those things don't, you've got to find those things. You have to seek them out because like you said, it's been 30 years, 40 years since that's been the case in garment manufacturing. And I just don't think people realize they've been just chipping it away at this over the years, and what they have now is not the same as what they got 30 years ago.
No, it isn't. And actually, someone told me once, and I think it's true, something that's really handmade, there is a part of your soul that goes into that product, which I think goes back to a little bit to that whole consciousness evolution and that feeling of really backtracking the chain and sort of seeing like, where did a garment or an accessory come from? Where did it go through? And if something is really made, by hand and so on, and with a lot of love, you can feel it. I mean, you can tell me what you want, but you can't feel it. There is a piece of the soul that goes into that part. Do you see this differently?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, people, and I was talking about this recently, I think we're going to start to see a shift. I think it's happening already, but people are becoming more conscious of the things that they buy, and they want to buy locally. They want to buy from someone that they know has put the work into it. And I think it doesn't mean that, garments are being made by people overseas mostly. And, there's a lot of machinery involved, but there's people behind the machines. And I think that's the disconnect, is that we don't understand that process, and we don't understand the people and the livelihoods and everything that goes into making a garment, because you can go buy a t-shirt as easily as you can go buy a bag of chips. And so I think that the more that we reconnect to who makes the things that we buy, and buy with intention, and buy with, like an end use in mind, like I know I love this, so I want it. And that makes a really big difference, instead of just buying something, wearing it for a week or a month, and then sending it over to Goodwill because you think that that's the next best thing to do for your garments.
Yeah, I totally agree. Rachel, I want to move on to you. So obviously you sort of put a system in place to connect all these different pieces. Tell us a little bit in terms of what got you inspired, where are you now, who's part of that, how many people are participating already, and where do you see this go?
Thank you. Well, yes, I started this, just because I had so many years in the industry and really saw firsthand what happens. I was always looking at the supply chain. I was a designer and design manager for 23 years. I know I don't look that old, but hey. And I really just saw firsthand what was going on. Didn't really know what to do with that for a long time. And then my mother passed away, and I thought, actually, I can be a stand for this, and I can start to go towards building some stuff, And at first that was just very simply creating events, which actually Maria's brand was one of the first people to show up at that. So that's amazing. But learned so much about sustainability, actually started then lecturing on sustainability and ethics in business at university. And then, started my consultancy and started to work with very small to medium-sized brands, and realized there was, when we were trying to apply sustainability to these brands, it was almost like a sticking plaster to the economic system that we're kind of sitting on. And that's always set up to GDP growth. It's always set up to that level of accountability. So for me, starting the incubator is about changing the way we do business. It's about making our own economy, and it's about having everyone in the system, whether it's brands like these guys, or whether it's people who are the growers, the people that make them. We have everyone in the industry coming towards building with us, and they can start to collaborate to those kind of economies of scale that large companies have, but with the agility of the small brands and the real high level quality and of sustainability that they want to put into it. It's a way to actually start to collaborate for greater change.
You actually mentioned a really important point that I think we need to pick up here for a second, because you talked about we're so driven by the GDP and we're so driven by numbers and so on, and I actually want to get into that a little deeper in a moment, but just to pick it up so we don't forget about this, because really sustainability is when we look at nature, and I think that's really at the heart of the thing. When you look at sustainability, it's closely linked to how nature works. Nature is cyclical. There is no linear steady growth, and I think this is one of the biggest the biggest factor in our economy and in our manufacturing generally, because we have the system set up so that you need to have, the banks need their money every first of the month and their interest and blah, blah, blah. And so everybody needs this constant linear growth. Well, the only thing that really constantly grows is cancer, if you're really honest about this. Everything else goes cyclical. It doesn't go straight. And I think that's part of the problem. So to break that, I think that's something we need to talk a little bit more in depth, and that's going to take a little bit more time. But before we get into that, I want to ask a question to Zain and also Maria. Who are your consumers? Who are the people you make the fashion for? So
for me, we created Bello for women that are just like me, the women that they love fashion. They don't want to compromise on the style for their values. That we created for that customer. Like when people talk about, is your customer paying? Is knowing that they want to express themselves. They want to have something that is aesthetically beautiful, has that design-led experience, but also it still contributes for, gives like a positive impact in the world. That's the people we are aiming towards. Those fashion people that want something better for the world.
Now, do you have like a number where you can measure sort of the impact that, for example, one bag would have on the community? So if I purchase that bag, for example, and I think it would be a really nice feel when I know, well, I'm a contributor and this is how I impact, and I have sort of a number to it.
Yes, definitely. That's exactly what we do, because we think that is a good way for people to start to educate themselves and to understand who is behind it. You know, like you guys were talking about, the people that make those outfits, you know, that create the garments, create the accessories. And we don't realize that behind every product that we buy, there is someone working really hard to create it. So it doesn't matter if it's $1, you know, $100,000, there is people behind working really hard to create it. So for us, not only that, there is the impact of the materials. So every bag that we make, we have a label that goes with it, and we show how many seat belts were rescued from landfill to create the bag, how many plastic bottles, if we use any sort of fabric that comes from fabric banks or offcuts, we also put that information in there too. And what we do as well, we work with the community of our artisans in Brazil, with NGOs that really work towards making their lives better. And one of the things that we do is we donate plates of food with every bag that we sell. So also you see the bag, like the amount of plates of food on each bag as well, because we really want the customer to understand the impact and also what it takes to make that bag. For our new collection now, we're going to put a QR code on every single bag, every single product, because we know that after if the customer doesn't want the bag anymore, if they resell it or give to someone, that person that gets the bag will also going to be able, through the QR code, to understand the journey of the bag. Because we're thinking of longevity as well, which is part of the circular economy model that we want to achieve.
That is super cool. Sign, who is the consumer that you envision? Who are you making your blankets and your throws and so on for? Who would use them? Can you describe the customer?
Yeah, it's actually for people who have this inclination to embrace change. It's pretty funny. There's no defined target audience that I have as such. It started off, as I mentioned, it's sort of a reflection of me, you know, and I talked about perspectives before, and it's about the logo of Sterling Method is this triangle with a little bit of the triangle open, and that glyph represents having the ability to embrace change. And so we have a lot of people who come to us who are curious, who have this sort of wanderlust to know more and to expand their horizons. So it's really ranged the whole gamut of age groups, all kinds of people from all over the country. It's primarily been the United States, but you know, people who crave a bit of, maybe not reset, but a reconnection to what they consume and what they feel in today's world, and what they can do to expand, you know.
Okay, I get that. Let's shift gears here for a moment and talk a little bit about what are the main issues in fashion that we actually, or that you're trying to address, and what are kind of the red flags, so to speak, that are sticking out. So I know I mentioned some of it in the intro in terms of the waste that we're having, but what particularly moved you when you look at, you know, the collections that you're creating and your impact? What were the two major reasons that you were trying to address with those lines, or you're trying to change the model?
For me, for Sterling Method, it was, I feel like there's a lack of transparency. And with Sterling Method, what I'm trying and in the process of achieving today, every day, is to connect the product not just to the consumer through shipping, but through a story of where that product came from, what the origin of that was, and who made that product, what went into it, versus fast fashion factories that build in bulk. Each one of my products is unique. The cotton thread can vary, the color, the slight tint of it can vary depending on the artisan who's working on it. And I plan on highlighting these artisans. And the best part about this is that the people that I'm working with, they work in these smaller looms in these communities, and they worked at factories, fast fashion factories, or manufacturing units. But there was no acknowledgement. Wages were low. Conditions weren't the best. When I went in there, I figured, if I, as a business person, if I'm going to make a difference here to sell this product, what I want to do is to ensure that it is premium, it is quality, but also that the people that I work with, I want to partner with them and not to have them on a wage bill. So I pay them a premium, they want to work with me, and as we talk about a circular economy, a circular system, they say, hey, we would like to work with you versus the factory because of the standard that they're getting. They prefer to work with me. I tell their story. It's sort of a win-win situation, which is the change that I want to drive through Sterling Method.
And then Maria, you talked a little bit about the waste. We heard that. What are the two main things that you are trying to address when you look at fashion?
So for me, the biggest one is shifting the concept of beauty. Because there's something that we always say, my partner and I, is that real beauty should never go to waste. And sometimes when you look at luxury goods, they are always, not sometimes, they always come from leather, or new materials. It has to be something new. It has to be something premium. But who said that you can't have something beautiful and premium that comes from something that already exists? So we really want to break the status quo of the industry so they can start shifting. And it's just not about let's upcycle this waste, that this fabric that came from a different season. No, let's think of materials that already exist outside the box. Let's think of seatbelts. We work with tire inner tubes now, and we work with umbrellas. Like the umbrella that breaks, you have this beautiful fabric that is so powerful, and you can do so much with it, and it's also water resistant. No one thinks about that. So let's shift the mentality that we have to have something new to be beautiful. That should be considered luxury. And in the beginning of our journey, that's what everyone used to tell us. They'll be like, you're never going to be able to become a luxury brand because they look for premium leather. They look for, and you're using waste.
Yeah, and I was going to get to that because I think it's going to be really challenging and difficult to market it in a way. So when you ask someone and say, this is a beautiful product, and then when somebody says, what's it made from, and then people are going to say it's made from trash. So I think the positioning and the marketing, that's going to take a real major shift to move towards that, right?
Definitely. It is an obstacle that we are happy to take on because we feel once we break that barrier, that's when things are going to start to change, and also the idea as well that you have to always be on trend, that things shift so much. No, you need to think that things have to be timeless, like Zane was saying, like Alicia was saying, slow living. It's also about understanding that you don't need so much. Like our bags, like you saw in the video, you can wear it 5 ways. So you don't need much to look incredible, to look fashionable. We need to start thinking of how we can have like this staple options in our closets, that we don't always have to feel pressure to be in the latest trend of fashion as well.
Rachel, what do you think is going to cause the switch to actually get more into the industry and overcome some of these perceptions that we have and getting onto the market as well?
I think it's all it's a systemic thing that needs to be addressed in all of these aspects, and I really resonate with everything that everyone's doing and everyone in the ecosystem is doing. And it's that systemic change that we need to look at to push innovation and to share about these things and how that they can be beautiful, and to do that as one rather than kind of being one person on their own in individual. Together we can actually push that and share those different ways, because the big guys, they're not going to do stuff like using seatbelts for their stuff, right? So actually the small innovative brands can come together and then and get that forward, get the message out there.
Alicia, you worked also you work in retail, so you know the big box retail, you know smaller retail. What do you see as the major shifts that would need to occur to sort of branch out with more conscious and sustainable fashion and make it more mainstream?
Well, it's funny. I think sustainability as it is right now is pretty mainstream, but because it has become so mainstream, people don't really know what it means. And so because so many big box retailers, so many brands have tagged on to a version of sustainability that they think they need to have in order to reach new customers, in order to resonate with millennials and younger generations. They're doing certain things to tick the boxes. And so as long as companies think that they can tick those boxes by doing certain things, which is just a metric, it's, you've got a certain percentage of sustainable fabric in a certain percentage of the product offering that you have.
Yeah, and actually it never says what exactly they mean by the sustainable fabric, for example. It doesn't mean anything. No, it only says we support sustainability, and then it's put on somewhere on a box, and maybe they don't use plastic bags to package, but that's about it.
And most of them still do use plastic bags to package because it's the most convenient thing to use. Yeah. But I think it's gonna be a balancing act between customers and what they demand, because in many cases, especially the bigger that you get, they're not going to change anything until you have an uprising from their customer base demanding that they want something different other than what they already offer. Because the mentality across the board, in which this is why fashion is still in the same position it's in, is that if it's not broke, we're not going to mess with it. If we can make money, we're not changing anything. And so it has to be about, companies have to feel the pressure that they're going to lose business, excuse me, before they change something about being truly sustainable. And so I think the biggest thing for big companies is that if their volume levels are affected and people aren't buying the same amount of the same kinds of things anymore, or they're not buying as frequently, or they're going to secondhand markets instead of buying new stuff every week, every month, or whatever it is, that's going to be the shift, I think, because then it hits their bottom line, it hits their margins, and then consumers have found another way to take the lead on what they actually want out of this industry. And it's so interesting because it's a cycle, just like everything else. And there's this book I read called Fashion is Spinach. I read this in college, and actually made me reconsider going into fashion in the first place. I was like, what am I doing? Why am I going into an industry that operates this way? But I thought that I could do something to change it. So that's been my mindset from the beginning. But Elizabeth Banks, I believe is the author's name, but she talked about this cycle of, we sell women, and it was about women's wear. We sell women on these trends. We tell them to go after this. They must do this to fit into society. But really, it should be about function. It should be about lasting style. And that's the thing that, fashion's been on this wheel, on this machine of just getting more and more and more and more and growing. And I think, it's become this behemoth of something that we really need to rein in, and no one, it's not going to be any one person or any one solution. It's going to be a collection of doing things differently. And that's going to be the only way we actually change it. And I think customers will see that, but they also have to rise up and say, I want something different other than what you've been giving me for the past, however many years. So it's going to be a balancing act.
Yeah, I think it's actually strongly connected to the rise of consciousness that we're sort of taking on and really becoming more the real you. I think the more authentic we all become, the more real, so to speak, we all become, then you also make much more individual choices, and you don't go by these trends, you know, these trend pushers that say this is what the trend's gonna be, this is what you must have, this is the brand you need to wear, etc., etc., etc. Because I compare it a little bit more to having sort of your own sovereign mentality, so to speak, because then you look for quality and you make your own choices, and you're a lot less vulnerable to go with the same choices that everybody else makes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely tied into that evolution of consciousness, I think. And that's what's happening. And I think you see it in beauty, you see it in food, you see it in fashion, you see it in a lot of other places, industries, because people are becoming more aware and more conscious of what they're consuming in all ways. Yeah. So definitely.
Yeah. What are the barriers of entry for sustainable fashion brands right now to get into retail or to get into the market? Who wants to take that?
Nicolette, before I just want to, I think we'll tie in with what we're discussing.
Yep.
But I also think that influential people, celebrities, you know, all these influencers, you know, in the social media, on the internet, they also have a biggest role that I think they don't understand when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to conscious fashion. Because let's take, for example, Rihanna. When Rihanna came with her brand, she decided that she was going to make lingerie for all. She decided she was going to make makeup for all, which is something so obvious. But we've never seen such a detailed color palette before, and it was such a thing. And now if you go on any makeup brand, they are going to have extremely detailed color palette, you know, for concealers and everything. And it's the same with how Rihanna's brand pushed other lingerie brands to change and to think of other types of bodies, you know. So I think that when it comes to now, celebrities have every celebrity has their own lingerie line, clothing line, shoe line, every type of line. And they're so influential that they can also push for better choices. You know, they can also turn that side of conscious fashion, you know, to be transparent. They can also do that. Rihanna did a little bit with Fenty by being not testing in animals, you know, and I think that people, they start to also understand things better when they see that the people they look up to are very serious about those subjects, not only by talking, but also by, you know, doing and acting on it. You know, so for me, one of the barriers is actually that we want to see the Kim Kardashians of the world talk about these issues. And actually, we want to see her with her brands being like, okay, we're going to use the best possible material that is not going to have such a big impact in the
Okay,
in the
but
world.
hang on a second here. I'm going to challenge you on this one. I understand what you're saying, but I really don't think that the world needs a Kim Kardashian or someone else to hide behind them again, to sort of wait until they take a role in sustainability when this is a very complex issue that I'm not even sure most of them actually understand beyond the talking point. So I think it's a much bigger issue, and I think the responsibility is much more on the actual everyday consumer versus waiting for celebrities. We're no longer in a celebrity world. When you look at how consciousness evolution is coming in, I really think it goes to the onus of everyone that's out there to find their own style, get more conscious of the choices that they have, and really try to understand how this is all interconnected instead of waiting for someone who kind of, you know, sort of, I'm not even sure they see the big picture, to be quite frank. I think it's way too complex for that. So I think, you know, it really needs to go more to the individual consumer versus just waiting until a celebrity goes out and says, oh, we're going to push, you know, using manufacturing from a bag or stuff like this. You see what I mean?
I understand that, but I think that unfortunately that's how the world works.
No, it isn't. I do not accept that.
I think so. Do you know why? Because you've never seen so many celebrities being billionaires. If they weren't so influential, or you've never seen so many celebrities influence on politics and people, on so
Yeah,
many
and that's
things.
not a good thing.
Right. No, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just being realistic with the situation. For example, I know for a fact that if my brand Bello was if Kim Kardashian was wearing Bello, she was like, guys, I think making things out of waste is the new best thing. I know I'm not talking about how deep she is or if she's really thinking about it, but I believe that those people, they are in the spotlight, unfortunately, they have a responsibility as well to talk about these issues and to do better choices when it comes to their own business ventures. And that really influences, because before, I don't think people used to think so much about other types of bodies in lingerie and stuff like that before Rihanna started talking about it. And you see the Fenty being such a huge success and people want to watch that, and other lingerie brands taking notes. It's not that I don't, something that I like to happen, but I think realistically, when you have like a system like social media that is basically people influencing each other so big, TikTok, how many people are so like billionaires because of TikTok, that for me, unfortunately, that's how the world works. Because once, for me, for example, now we're going to sell in a big retail store in the UK. And because we're selling in a big retail store and we say that to people, now people want to work with us. They always said no. So the stamp of approval of someone that is influential in the fashion industry is actually opening doors for us.
Yeah.
So it's not like for people are not brave enough sometimes to make their own choices and be like, I'm going to do it.
But
so we need these influential people to change, like it was the only retail store that accepted us and that made a leap, because the other ones are like, oh, we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah.
We're going to see. No one wants to compromise until someone says it's okay to.
Well, it always takes someone who's brave enough to take something on and try it out.
Yeah.
There's always someone who sort of has to take, to lead in that. And I think that's really where I would see the biggest potential is also embracing this whole mindset shift, not just in words, but actually really doing this, embracing a platform that gives these innovators like you, like Zane, like Alicia's line, a much broader sort of platform to really push it out. I think that's where we could really see some major change happen. But let's talk a little bit more about the barriers of entry. So we heard some of them. Some of them is obviously that there is sort of not the perception yet, and because it's not fully accepted, it's harder to get into a retail. So what are some of the practical things that are also an issue? Is volume an issue? Is the manufacturing process an issue? Is Alicia or Zane, any one of you wants to talk about that?
Sure. Tactically, besides just the concept, tactically there are challenges. There are challenges with everything and seemingly every day, but that's okay. That's the journey. The big challenge that I face is that I've understood that it's, people are the way they are, and people are traditionally, human nature dictates that we are averse to change, and that's okay. But when we're promoting or we're trying to get an idea out, a product or a brand that's based on an idea out into market, into the hands or into the eyes and views of other people, there's a lot that goes into it. Mm-hmm. Practically, I have, besides the message of how do I use the product to be a vehicle and a catalyst for change, that includes the story and all of that. Besides that, it's also, we live in unprecedented times. No one is going to forget the last 2 years of where they were, what they were doing, what their disposition was. And so because of that, I feel like there has been such a tremendous shift in practically doing things. For instance, getting the right color for me, getting the right person at the right time. I'm working in 2 different time zones, and I'm here in New York, but then I have people that I work with in Pakistan. I've gone to Pakistan a couple of times, but meeting the partners that I work with, the artists, or the artisans, can I count on them? Okay, will you be able to deliver me five of these organic wool blankets on time?
Yeah.
Will they look exactly the same? So everything has to go in with a grain of salt, and that is in essence, slow living. And I'm getting used to the notion that is okay. I have to change that myself in order for this to be successful. I have to continue embracing that change and accept that, okay, this is if I'm the change catalyst in battling fast fashion, let's say, if that's how we want to say it, I'm okay with being slower. But as long as it's potent, I'm okay with that.
So we talked a little bit about the change of consciousness. We talked about the mindset shift. We talked about influences. Let's talk about one other thing. So when we talk about sustainable fashion, do we all need to give up sort of the feeling hot and sexy?
Not necessarily, no.
Alicia, what's your take on that?
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying before. It depends on what you consider sustainable. And I think any style can be made in a sustainable way, but again, it depends on how you're measuring sustainability. Is it sustainable fabric? Is it that it was locally made? Is it that it was upcycled, or you're using, extra yardage from a mill because it was going to get thrown in a landfill? Like it, you can. I think it goes back to context and the story that you're telling, and whether or not you're connecting that value to the customer and why. Because there's value in using clothing to express yourself, to feel sexy, to feel confident.
Yeah.
That's what connected me to fashion in the first place. But I can go into a thrift store and come out with things that make me feel confident. But I also like to buy things from Nike and brands like that sometimes, unfortunately. Like they make things that I really like. There's an aesthetic. Like there's certain brands, and I struggle with that too. Like there's aesthetics out there that I really like that fit a new, colorway or whatever that might be, and I really like it. But I don't necessarily just buy those things because I like it. I do here and there. But I think it's like, to your point, it goes back to the customers and understanding, why they're buying certain things, or, what is the end goal when they do.
We're out of time. I do want to give each of you one word to describe sort of like your ideal fashion world of the future. Let's go. Rachel, I'm going to start with you. How do you see it?
One word. Regenerative.
Okay. Zane, sorry.
Evolved.
What was that?
Evolved.
Oh, evolve. Okay. Maria?
Circular.
Okay. And then Alicia?
I was actually going to say circular as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming on. It was really great to have you. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously, you see there's so many things we need to consider, starting with what's sustainable to you and what impact does it have. And I think it really would help tremendously if we actually sort of can follow back the stories that we have, where an item is coming from, and start wearing that as a connective piece versus just sort of throwing it out. Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next week. Stay centered, stay calm, and be yourself. I think that will be the best message of all. Have a good night.